I'm James Ford at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Please experience this most unique place with us, with the chief curator of this museum, one of the people most responsible for assembling the remarkable collection here 15 years after that day we'll never forget.
We are 7 stories below ground. This is literally where the human engineering feat of the World Trade Center hit bedrock, Manhattan schist, and stopped. So this would have been the lowest sort of utility floor of the World Trade Center. For years during the memorial ceremonies held on September 11th, families would come down with bouquets and prayer cards and so forth and often lay them on the box column remnants. So they're very special, and we light them so that you can see sort of their ghostly remains in a way.
This is a museum and then so much more because it's so active, if I may use that word.
Well, I think that's a great way of putting it, because it's always in dialogue with what's not here anymore. It's what's here and what's not here, and that dynamism is always part of the emotion of the space. And our initial plan was to take some of the remnant steel recovered at the site and commission from Tom Joyce, who is an artist who was trained as a blacksmith, a reforging project where he would hand make from that remnant steel letters forming a quote from Virgil, "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." So out of the kind of horror of the event came a beautiful new memory and a promise. This piece, called Trying to Remember the Color of the Sky on that September morning, and what he did, which is really extraordinary, is he holed himself up in his studio for months on end and created these 2,983 individually watercolor painted squares. Each is a different shade of blue, and each in a way stands in for the unique qualities of each and every person who died on September 11th and the 6 who died in 1993. So it's about individuality, it's about numbers, but it's also about how memory operates. And each and every one of us who were here in New York on September 11th might remember the color of that blue sky differently.
How is it for you then, coming into this space on a very regular basis, being surrounded by the remnants of such a cataclysmic event?
It's a really good question, and it's one that our staff has often asked. How do you go to work every day when it's September 11th? And I think I would answer that we actually come to work every day. It's always September 12th. We did survive. We have the benefit of talking to people that were there, seeing how people have made meaning out of that tragedy, seeing what it's like, for a great city to be brought to its knees, for a country to be attacked, but not bowed over permanently by this. And what you're seeing is about 1/20th of that 300-foot soaring antenna that was up that day. It sort of reminds you of the Mercury space capsule, potentially. When I see it, it's this combination of the technological engineering triumph of the World Trade Center as a man-made construction project, and then just the poignancy of the human story that day. So yes, this was the broadcast antenna. Yes, obviously by the time the tower fell, I think there were 8 television stations, a number of FM radio stations that lost all of their connectivity. But there were 6 transmitting engineers who were up on the 110th floor, 104th floor, a few of them.
One of them
worked for Channel 11, doing their jobs, trying to power down, trying to get information out. So, it's got that double punch to it. It's both, a reminder of this soaring structure, and New York is sort of the center of the communications world, and yet it's also a tragedy. There's something, about the prostrate or kind of almost vanquished character of it that, it has metaphors it couldn't combat. And that is a 110-story building falling on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, this, to me, because people commonly, not everyone sees a television tower,
Right.
and certainly nobody ever sees
Right.
an elevator motor
Right.
as
Human. Right.
This people see all the time.
Absolutely.
And just to see just how significantly damaged this mighty vehicle is.
And what's very interesting too is among our visitor population, and we've had 6 million, heading towards 7 million visitors since the museum opened. We certainly know that among that visiting population, there are many people who are volunteer firefighters, or Red Cross personnel, or police officers in many, many nations, and they very often pause here to pay special respects because, again, it is the horrific irony of people that were trained to do their duty to come and help, who themselves ended up becoming victims that day. The encounter with the most intense piece of this story is always optional for visitors. They can walk in and they can walk out of the historical exhibition. It's not slammed into their face. And the way the historical exhibition is organized, which is through sort of a main pathway of information and experience with these alcove pullouts, again, you have the option to go into them, and you have the options to leave them, and there are early exits if you really have had enough. We try to give people cues through some of the period quotes as to what kind of content they're going to experience. But we found with the alcove dedicated to the, horrific sight of people falling to their deaths that day, that many people really want to go in there and pay their respects. After the buildings fell, it was buried deep in the ground. As excavations started here, there was a temporary roadbed over the top of the column. And when it wasn't exposed until, maybe just the tip top, early March, let's say. And there was a particular fire company, Squad 41, that had last heard from their men in the South Tower lobby. And they put a little mark on the top of this, knowing that this is where they wanted to come back and dig. And indeed, when the roadbed came up and they started digging, they found marked tools. We have one of them in one of the cases over here. So they knew they had found the spot. Anyway, they're digging, it's getting exposed, and eventually the city finds out that it's a little bit ahead of schedule in terms of the actual, cleanup. And there will be an opportunity to do a ceremony around some kind of a ceremonial last load. And there was a growing consensus that it really needed to be a piece of steel that was still upright, proud, bearing no evidence beyond weathering of the event itself. And so this was the piece that was chosen.
If there's one thing, not to oversimplify, but if there's one thing you want a visitor to come away from this experience with, what would it be?
I think it's when you're absolutely pressed to the wall or knocked to the ground, whether it's as an individual, a community, a country. You'd be surprised how much resourcefulness and resilience you actually have if you get yourself up, reach out, and collectively do something. I mean, we are in a site that is transformed 15 years later from what it tragically was left as at the end of that day. And we did it because people didn't quit. They didn't cower in their houses. They didn't, look out only for their own personal safety. They helped. And I think this is a great tribute to that. We are really a very resilient and resourceful community, which doesn't mean we don't have our scars. I think you always bear your scars. You learn from your scars. But ultimately, I think it's a very positive story. We haven't ended terrorism in the world, but we have shown the world what we can do when we work together, collectively with grit.